welcome to our CONUL Teaching Learning Annual Seminar. You're very welcome. My name is Niall McSweeney and I'm chair of the CONUL Teaching Learning Group. It's great to see such numbers attending today, and I think it's indicative of how relevant the topic is. So key lessons from a year of unprecedented change in academic libraries looking at digital education. I suppose if you go back a year ago, we were all looking at our digital offering, our online offering, and seeing how we could improve the capacity and the access. And then COVID hit, and there was a massive tilt to online. So we've achieved an awful lot in the last year. So this morning is about looking at what we've achieved, celebrating it, sharing it, and being honest with each other. And indeed, it's a confidence issue as well. You know, have we achieved something wonderful? What are we going to do moving forward? What will the situation be at the end of COVID? So many questions. And we've designed a morning that's very interactive. Lots of chance to participate. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, sorry, I was hearing a strange noise at that point. So the morning, just a few things about how the morning is structured. The session is recorded, and talks will be available on the CONUL YouTube channel and the CONUL website. Have you already heard from Anya that we have 3 Padlets to link to our 3 themes, webinar themes? And if you haven't already participated, there'll be a chance all morning to participate, and certainly during the coffee break as well. We're using breakout sessions as well for the coffee. You'll be assigned automatically into a breakout session, so you'll have a chance to work with a particular group of people. So hopefully that'll be fun and very interesting as well. And so in terms of commenting on us, chat is open and you can use the chat at any time. And we have a team of people who will be monitoring chat. And also, if you prefer to use the hands up, we can incorporate that as well. There'll be a chance after each speaker to ask 1 or 2 questions. And of course, we'll build to our conversation period led by Sharon at 12 o'clock. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speakers, and absolutely personally thrilled to have Sharon Flynn here. Sharon is a wonderful friend of libraries and colleague, and sees the partner role of librarians in the academic process. Sharon has a wonderful project at the moment. She's project manager for enhancing digital capacity and teaching learning in Irish universities. It's a 3-year project funded through the Higher Education Authority Innovation Transformation Programme. She works closely with senior academic leaders and project team members across the university sector to develop the digital confidence, skills and competencies of those who teach in Irish universities, and enhance the digital the digital learning experience of Irish university students. And we're delighted that she is joined by Ruairi, who is the current IUA student intern for enhancing digital competencies in teaching and learning in Irish universities. He's based in UCC. He has a master's in computer science, he's a BA, excuse me. He's a BA in computer science and is currently doing his master's in data science. Ruairi has a strong interest in digital technology and tools in teaching and learning, and with the view to making learning more accessible, interactive, and fun. So at this point, I'll hand over to Sharon.
Thanks a million, Niall, for that that lovely introduction. And of course, we know each other well because I'm currently on secondment from NUI Galway. So if you just bear with me while I share my slideshow. Somebody might give me the thumbs up. Let me know that you can see that all right. Brilliant. Thanks, Anya. Yeah, absolutely delighted to be here today, and very happy that I have Ruairi speaking with me. We have 4 other of our student interns here today who will be speaking a little bit later on as well. So so do make sure that you're here to listen to them, because they have they're a fantastic bunch of people and they have a really powerful message for you. So I know Niall is going to jump in if I start going over time, but hopefully I won't. But we'll get started. I'm going to tell you a little tale today in 5 phases, and you know, most of those phases you're familiar with. It's not anything new to you, but you might be interested in just kind of I suppose, our perspective on things from the Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning project. I called this talk today, if I wanted to teach online, I wouldn't start here, for reasons which should become more obvious as we go along. So let's start with phase 0. 70%, what does that refer to? Well, you're probably familiar with a survey that took place back in November of 2019, which is, it's about 14, 15 months ago now. So before COVID, just before COVID, really. And that survey was the Index survey, the Irish National Digital Experience Survey, which was a survey of staff and students across the whole Irish higher education sector on their digital experience. It was run by the National Forum for Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. And this is one of the outcomes of that survey, which I keep bringing up again and again and again, because I think it's so important looking back now. 70% of staff who teach had not done so in a live online environment. So that is the statistic, as I say, from November of 2019. We know that that statistic is very, very different now, but I think it also sets the scene, and it gives a sense of the challenge that staff were facing when the pivot happened. So we'll come back to that in a second. Let's move on. Let me tell you a little bit about the Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning project. Now, Niall was using the full version of it, which I find a real tongue twister. So it's enhancing digital capacity in teaching and learning in Irish universities was the full name of the project. And I just, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So it became the Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning, or EDTL project. And as Niall mentioned, it's funded through the HEA Innovation and Transformation Programme. And the aim, the high level stated aims of it are to enhance the digital attributes of our graduates and the educational experiences of Irish university students. But the focus was to be through professional development of staff who teach. So the idea is that by enhancing the digital capacity of staff who teach, you would therefore have this, I suppose, knock-on effect, that you would enhance digital attributes and the educational experience of Irish university students. That link isn't actually proven, but that was the idea behind it. Now, I can remember being interviewed for the role of project manager, and I got to the second interview, and I had been given a couple of tasks to do in between, and one of them was to identify the stakeholders. And I have to say that because of that area of the enhancing digital skills of students and the graduate attributes of students, I have to say that library staff was very close to the top of my list, because I recognize the very major and very important role that libraries play in this area. So I just wanted to mention that. So we got started. As I say, the project was from January of 2019. I came on board in May of 2019, which is really when the project began to get off the ground. So we were already in existence pre-COVID, and we had the funding from the HEA. What that allowed us to do was to have staff embedded in each of the 7 partner universities of the IUA. So there was a bit of time spent at the beginning of the project just trying to recruit those people, get them on board, and figure out what we were doing. And we had a project plan. I had a lovely plan in place for January to June of last year, and we were all nicely on track until on the 12th of March, and I'm sure you all remember this. I think it's one of those moments, you know where you were when this announcement was made. On the 12th of March 2020, Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, announced that all schools, colleges and universities would move online. We'd had a little bit of a heads up. Trinity had gone a couple of days before, and I had been talking to my team members in Trinity to find out what's happening, what advice is being given to staff, what are people doing, and there was that kind of little bit of a sense of, I suppose, panic and thinking, oh my God, how are we going to manage this? How are we going to keep going? So anyway, on the 12th of March, the announcement came, and I was in Dublin at the time, in the IUA offices in Merrion Square. I got a train home to Galway that evening with my son, who was in college in Dublin at the time. And yeah, so from the next day, everything was online. So I actually wrote a blog post on that day, and that's where the title of this talk has come from. And it was called, "If I Wanted to Teach Online, I Wouldn't Start Here." It's actually the last blog post I've had time to write, because things have been so busy over the last, it's nearly a year now. We had already at that stage, I noticed, looking back at the blog post again in preparation for the talk today, I realized that we had already scheduled a webinar for 2 weeks after this, on the whole area of that move online, that sudden move online, and what we would do to support staff. But essentially, I knew that what we were looking into was not online teaching, not in its true sense, not in its pure sense, because online teaching takes a lot of effort. So I suppose my thinking at the time was, let's just very quickly get some advice out to those staff who are having to teach, just to let them focus, let them think about what they need to do over the next couple of weeks. So there were things like, this is just a kind of a very high level overview of the blog post. First of all, we knew that the technology was there. We knew that the virtual learning environments were in place. There was plenty of tools there. It wasn't a question of going out and buying new tools at the time. So the technology was there. There were loads of guides on how to use it. You know, people involved in teaching and learning centres, or people involved in learning technology, had been providing guides for this. They've been doing it for the last 10 or 15 years. So, so everything was there, it was in place. It was just maybe people weren't really aware of it. The second point was to use the technology provided. I think I say in the blog post, this is not the time to go rogue with the technology. Use your institutional technology, because there are people there to support it. Keep it simple, stay within your comfort zone. Don't go out to trying lots of new technologies, because you're only going to get confused, but do ask for help. Communicate with your students, don't just broadcast. And by that I meant, you know, talk to them about what's happening, how things are going, how you're going to manage the next couple of weeks. I also wanted to recognize that, and you know, this is something which I think we've become so much more aware of over the last year, is that students have diverse needs. There is no single student experience. So my advice at that stage was ask your students what they need. Ask them, you know, how things are going and what you can do to help them over this period of time. Very importantly, I said respect your EdTech people. I probably should have included your library people there as well, because God knows everybody was under so much pressure. At times like that, there can be a tendency, as you know, for people to get a little bit annoyed and a little bit, let's just say, disrespectful. So my advice was respect your EdTech people. We knew at that stage that assessment was going to be a problem. I'm not sure that teaching staff were aware of it at the time. They were just thinking, how do I keep teaching? But yeah, assessment became a problem. My next piece of advice was use a decent microphone. Now, at this stage, we know that students and ourselves will forgive a lot of things, but decent audio is so important. If you don't have that, it's very, very difficult to listen to anybody talking for any length of time if their audio is cutting out, or if there's a lot of background noise or whatever else is going on. And my final piece of advice was to support each other. So that was kind of my initial thinking that day that the announcement came, and before I moved back to Galway. But I wonder if we can think a little bit about, you know, how everybody else was feeling. And I'm using this idea of the sea metaphor, because initially that's what it felt like. Everybody was just at sea. A lot of the talk around that time, and even in my steering committee meetings, people were talking about everybody has just been thrown out into the sea without a lifeboat, without any floats, without rafts, and we have to get to shore. And that was the feeling, I think, at the time, was we need to see out this academic year. We need to ensure that we have continuity of teaching and learning and assessment and just get through this. And that was just the feeling. And do you know what? We did it in the end. It wasn't elegant. I think it was much more of a doggy paddle than anything else. But for the most part, we survived. I'm going to bring in Ruairi just now, because I think it's really useful to hear what the impact was on students at the time. So Ruairi, I have a question for you. What was the immediate impact on you? You were in your final year of your undergraduate.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sharon. Yeah, so I think, as Sharon said, that there was inklings on the run-up to the 12th of March that maybe we would be moving online. But even so, on 12th of March, when we got the email from the UCC about moving online, there was almost a sense of disbelief, I think, for myself and many of my other students. So I was in my final year of computer science, and it was kind of coming towards the business end of the year. So I had my final year project due. I had 5 modules that were going to be assessed, that were meant to be assessed in the traditional manner in maybe a month, 6 weeks from then. So the idea that we were going to be going completely virtual, to me, was just, I couldn't even believe it at the time. So very quickly, we kind of got a feel for it, of how things were going to be. So initially, I suppose I felt kind of helpless in some ways, just because all of a sudden I had gone from being in college and having the traditional structure and supports in place, such as the library or the computer labs, to having nothing. So it was just me at home with my laptop, which was initially quite a shock and was kind of quite overwhelming, actually. So for example, I'd be having meeting with my academic advisors about my project twice a week, and that was pushed to the wayside fairly fast. And so there was a lot of things just along those lines, just small things that just made stress of final year a bit more bearable, were all cast aside, just because everyone, I suppose, to use Sharon's metaphor, was out at sea and in the same boat. So as soon as we kind of switched to online learning, I think a lot of people sympathise greatly with the lecturers just with regards to trying to conduct online with such short notice. So everyone was taken by surprise, and I think, for a lot of us, it was actually probably our first time ever using Microsoft Teams, was the first day of online lectures. So we kind of got a feel very quickly just for how things were going. So for example, what works and what didn't work became apparent quite quickly. So a lot of our lecturers, understandably, just straight away decided that we're going to use Teams and we're going to keep the format the exact same as it was in before COVID hit. So for example, if you had a lecture scheduled from 2 to 3 on the timetable, it would be live on 2 to 3 on Teams. It wouldn't be recorded. You're expected to attend, and that would be it. Kind of very quickly, it kind of became apparent that this probably wasn't the best approach. But given the short notice, it was probably all that could be expected initially. So, I think as time went on, it became clear as numbers dwindled in attendance that, it was quite hard to stay engaged at home, and not having the lectures recorded wasn't really helping anyone. And this idea that it would kind of force people to attend was probably wishful thinking at best. So I think then, as we came towards the end of term and exam time came around, it became quite clear which lecturers had engaged with technology previously before and who hadn't with their approach. So for example, a few of my lecturers would have used our virtual learning environment, Canvas, to conduct exams for a midterm. And when we were doing our end of year exams, it was quite clear that they were familiar with the platform. So for example, they utilized the MCQ features. They knew how to make sure that they held live Teams meetings during the exam so we could chat with them during if we had any questions. And this was a stark contrast to other lecturers who kind of just said, the PDF exam paper will be available at Canvas at 2 o'clock, upload it, I'll talk to you later. So it was quite clear that there were some lecturers who would kind of take a more involved, student-focused approach, and others who would just kind of take the step back a bit and just say, this is how I always did things, and hope for the best. So this divide in the approach became very apparent very fast. And going into the first semester, of this year, I think it's clear that a lot of lecturers have actually changed their approach and put student at center, as EDTL approach preaches. So I think that's a good sign. But yeah, so just to sum it up, I think helplessness is probably the key word in how I felt initially, Sharon, when we went online.
Thanks, Ruairi. At the project level, what happened was that all of my project team members, so those people who were embedded in each of the universities, they got pulled back into frontline technical support. So they became the ones who were supporting the VLE, supporting lecture capture, supporting the exams and assessments. And they became very, very busy people who got kind of pulled away from the project at the time. So what was I doing? I have to say that I felt very uncomfortable at the time, I suppose, because I was that step removed. I knew that if I was still in NUI Galway, I would have been on the front line. But at this stage, I was at a kind of a step away, a higher level, if you like. So a couple of things that we did in the IUA initially as a very quick response was that we started what was called the Higher Education in Isolation series. And I have to give complete kudos to my colleague Kate Wood in the IUA, who came up with this idea. And essentially what we did was we persuaded a couple of people, staff and students, to document a little bit about how they were getting on, what was happening in those first few weeks. So our Higher Education in Isolation series took place over 6 weeks, and you can see from there that week 1 was actually from the 16th to the 20th of March. So from the immediate pivot. And each week we had a contribution from 3 people who were either staff members or student members, and we tried to get as wide a variety as possible from across the 7 universities, from different disciplines, from different situations. So for example, we had international students, both international students who stayed in Ireland and international students who had to go home. Students in direct provision, we had a nursing student, we had a PhD student. We had staff with various technical experience and expertise. We had one who was teaching from a trailer tent in her garden. We had another member of staff who was managing home life and small children at the same time. So we really tried to get a sense of what was going on, and you can still access those videos. It's really interesting, I think, at this stage to look back at them. But the other thing that we did was our webinar series and what we called our IUA DigEd community. Now, I have to say that this community was launched at the end of January. So the idea was that we would have this space for people to come together. We had a completely open sign up, so anybody could and anybody still can sign up to this community. And basically what it means is you get an email every 2 weeks inviting you to a webinar on some topic or other. Our aim at the time, back in January, was to have 130 members by the end of the year. Now, I have to tell you, at this stage, we've got about 680 members. So the number of people who signed up to it just exploded. And what we did initially was we very quickly put a number of webinars in place that addressed the current situation. So the first one you can see there was actually on the 23rd of March, and it was a very rushed, put together teaching online in a crisis. That was followed up 2 weeks later by assessment online in a crisis. And then as things went along, we brought in topics that we felt were relevant at the time for people. You can see there on the 11th of May, we had a special webinar where we invited back some of the people who'd been involved in the HE in Isolation series to talk about and reflect a little bit back, because by the 11th of May, we'd pretty much managed to get through teaching at least. And there was probably a fair bit of marking going on at that stage. But just to come back and reflect and to think about what they might have learned from the previous 6 weeks or so. But one thing that occurred very clearly to me quite early on, and I think again because I was that bit removed, I had a bit more space for thinking. But certainly by the end of April and into early May, I was thinking, do you know what? Things are not going to be normal by September. And at that stage, people were just so embedded in trying to get through, trying to survive and swim to the other side, if you think of it that way. There wasn't really that thinking going on. It was just this assumption that this was a very temporary thing. We'd be back to normal or some sort of normal by September. But I was thinking, you know what, this is not going to happen. This just cannot happen. So phase 2 then, and this is the third of my phases, if you like, because my first one was phase 0, was to think about how we can plan to do better in September. We survived the end of the last academic year, barely, but we survived it. And my thinking at the time was, we have to be able to do better in September. So that immediate pivot phase was coined very quickly emergency remote teaching. It wasn't online teaching. We know that online teaching is very planned, it's very organized, there's a lot of time, there's a lot of training that goes into it. Here, we knew that we had a very small window of opportunity to allow staff plan for something better in the next academic year. So, my steering committee back in May approved a refocus of the project. And we said that what we would try and do was to go from emergency remote teaching to effective remote teaching. So again, trying to acknowledge that we couldn't achieve perfect online teaching, but we could do something better. So we had a couple of principles in place that allowed us to get started on that planning. So I'll just go through these really quickly. Pedagogy first was always a pillar of the project from the very beginning. We always said that we would focus not on the tools and the technologies, but on pedagogy, whatever that pedagogy is. It's about how you want to teach and what you want to achieve, and then looking at how the technology can support that. And what happened in that initial pivot was very much a focus on the technologies and how do I use Zoom, or how do I use Teams, or how do I use Collaborate? And now what we wanted to do was to talk about, well, how are you going to teach? And then look at how those tools can support you. We wanted to ensure that we could provide a small set, a curated set, and I use that term very carefully when I'm talking to librarians, believe me, but a very small set of useful resources that would be just enough to get staff able to plan and be confident about the next academic year. Because we knew that there was a whole load of information out there, lots of advice coming from all sorts of areas. And staff, again, were drowning in too much information. We wanted to center the student and say, well, let's focus on the student and how we can build on that, rather than, again, focusing on the technologies. And we wanted whatever we produced to be completely open. It's a condition of our funding anyway, but open and inclusive. So not just for the 7 universities, but for the whole higher education sector across Ireland and beyond. So in May, we began talking about this notion of planning for effective remote teaching during COVID-19. And we called it the EDTL approach, EDTL for Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning. And the team came together to discuss the question, what advice would you give to a member of staff who is planning for more effective online or blended teaching in the new year? And we spent a little bit of time, probably about 10 days, talking about just what that advice would be. And as we talked about it collaboratively, 5 themes began to emerge. And we quickly decided that a good way to be able to communicate that would be in the form of an infographic. So that's where this infographic came out of. And we had our 5 themes there, very short points under each theme, sorry. And essentially just the sense of giving somebody advice, you know, okay, you've managed to survive the year so far. You're now planning your module for September. Here are the core things that you need to think about. And that infographic was given a soft launch in early June 2020, and it went down quite well. There was a lot of attention on it. And then we had a formal launch of it at a webinar in late June. So the infographic was put together within a month, that framework. And then what we did was we split into subgroups within, so I've got about 12 people across the 7 universities in my project team. And we split up and we began to collate and curate resources under each of those themes. And we said no more than 5 resources in any one theme. They have to be recommended by a member of the team, something that they have found particularly useful. They have to be open. And what we wanted, as I say, was a small collection of curated resources. Alongside that then, during the summer, we were continuing our community webinars, and they actually became weekly rather than every second week. And we aligned those webinars with the themes of our infographic. So we had one on each of the themes that appear in the infographic. We had a couple of other ones. So we had a very successful international perspectives on online teaching, which was organised by my colleague Kate Malloy of NUI Galway. And the attendance at those webinars was really quite good. There was a lot of interest. I think a lot of teaching staff were almost desperate to find something that they could just hold on to. It's like that life raft, to come back to that drowning metaphor. We collected some feedback recently, and some people have described it as being a little bit like a short course over the summer to get them prepared for September. We consistently had between 40 and 60 people attending the webinars live, but we record all the webinars and make them available openly on the website afterwards. We use a very open Creative Commons license, so those webinars can be reused, embedded, repurposed in whatever way is appropriate. So those were essentially, that was our activity over the summer. We also produced another infographic, which was for people who were moving a program, so program leaders moving a program online. And then we had a separate infographic as well for lab-based subjects, because we recognize that as being a particular issue for staff. And all of those are available on the website. And I know that Ruairi is posting links into the chat box there. So you can find all of those online. But as summer progressed, it became clear that students would also need some guidance. We'd had a student intern in place since the previous November, so November 2019. Vish had been our student associate intern, and his contribution to the project had been, really quite exceptional. So when we recruited Ruairi, who came on board in what, June, July, Ruairi, I think, his first task really was to think about, well, what guidance could we give to students for preparing for effective remote learning during COVID-19? The student voice and student partnership is extremely important to the project. So again, I had the support of my steering committee when I made the suggestion that, quite apart from just having a single IUA student intern, it would be very, very useful, and we would really benefit from increasing the student voice and student partnership within the project. So at that stage, we made the decision to recruit a student intern in each of our 7 universities. And as you know, some of our student interns are with us today, and they're going to be speaking later. They have a kind of a dual role. So part of their role is to bring student voice to the project team. They have a university-based role as well. So they work with the existing team members on the ground within the university setting, liaising with local units, the student union, etc. But they also contribute at a project level, and I think some of our students are going to be talking a little bit about that later on. But the first main task was to produce the equivalent of the EDTL approach for students. So I'm going to just ask Ruairi to talk a little bit about the development, and I'll put up the student infographic now.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Yeah, so the student intern team, as Sharon said, comprises of at least one intern in each of our IUA member universities. And I think when I first met the student intern team, and we've done all this work virtually, we still haven't met in real life just because of COVID. The first thing that became quite apparent to me was how different all of our backgrounds were and all of our experiences are in college. So there's such a wide variety of different courses. We're all doing different experiences, living arrangements, etc., which means that when we do develop something such as the EDTL approach for students, we're able to take an approach that takes in so much different experiences that we think it makes it applicable to as much students as possible. So when we combined our experiences, we managed to create this EDTL approach for students. So our aim with this infographic was to allow students early on in the year to kind of ground themselves and set themselves up for what is now looking like it's going to be a full year of online only learning. So when we were creating this infographic, collaboration was the name of the game for us. So as I said, we've never met each other, and we still haven't. Yet we were able to use digital tools and operate completely remotely to work effectively on this project, much like we have many other projects which student interns have worked on. So as well as when we were creating this, the kind of, for us anyway, it just went to show that it is possible that good practice in the digital sphere can work and can be effective. So not only can we apply it to this infographic, but it could also be applied in a college setting when it comes to assigning group assignments. So it was a learning experience for us as well. So when we were creating this infographic, we drew from our own experiences as well as the experiences from the people we know. And as Sharon said, we kept the pedagogy first approach to keep it as applicable as possible. So you'll see on the infographic that there's lots of different topics we touch on, such as the ones that are probably the most, kind of the ones that come up most often when we're speaking to our fellow students about what issues they are learning online. So for example, staying organized, making sure you have a workspace which is conducive to a good online learning environment, and utilizing technology effectively so you can take advantage of some of the advantages that online learning offers students. So even on a day-to-day basis, it became clear that our experiences are very different. So for example, I'm a postgrad student studying a maths-oriented course, while other student interns are studying subjects such as medicine, business, multimedia. So for each of us, we're able to contribute a very unique perspective to this infographic, and I think it really shines through. So we didn't actually focus solely on the academic aspects in this infographic, you might notice. There's a very important look after yourself aspect, which we think was a very important addition. So a lot of students finding not only is online learning difficult from an organizational perspective, but also in terms of looking after themselves, because there's no longer going to college, there's no longer walking between lectures, kind of forcing to have a break. You could quite easily be sitting down for 3 or 4 hours at a time and not getting up. So we thought that it was very important to integrate wellness as well into this infographic. So yeah, so that's the team of looking after yourself also shines through in our other resources, which I'll touch on later. So yeah, so that was the development of the EDTL approach for students, which we so far received very good feedback from.
Thanks, Ruairi. So moving on to the next phase then. By September, we pretty much had everything in place. We felt we had done what we could do over the summer, and a lot of the project team then again got pulled back into that kind of frontline supporting staff on campus. Of course, over the summer we had this kind of almost surreal period where there was this, I think this belief or hope that we would actually have students on campus. You know, and I heard all the stories about, you know, people out with measuring tapes and trying to measure 2 meters between seats and all this kind of thing. And it was, I don't think I ever believed that we would successfully get students back in bulk on campus. But I have to say, you know, certainly the libraries really stepped up in providing study spaces for students, even if most of the teaching was online. So back in September, you'll remember there was that next announcement saying, yes, everything's online again. It was left so very late, and you know, a lot of people left uncertain, staff and students, about exactly what was going to happen, and a lot of people very upset about it as well. But basically everything went online again, apart from lab-based activities, and my team members got back supporting staff again frontline. So at the project level then, we continued trying to bring the student voice. So we stepped away a little bit, and back in September, my steering committee made the decision that, you know, we had done our refocus and we wanted to step back up to that kind of higher level. But we wanted to continue to bring the student voice and the student perspective as to what was happening on the ground, how it was affecting students, and allow students have a voice in terms of, you know, what was working. Ruairi mentioned this earlier on. So for example, we had a very, very successful webinar back in October, where our students came together. I have to say, I'm so impressed with our students. As Ruairi mentioned, they've never actually met together. But if you wanted a really good example of students collaborating and group work by students, I have to recommend this this webinar to you, this one in particular. Ruairi, do you want to talk a little bit about this webinar and how it went?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. So I think all of our webinars so far are based off the infographics you would have seen. So for example, our first webinar was based on the EDTL approach for students by students, and our second one was based on student assessment. So I think that just to kind of draw a line between the infographics and the webinars, whilst the infographics provide information at a glance, we can only fit so much information in an infographic just to make sure it's readable. So we use webinars as an opportunity to delve deeper into the topics and themes that we mentioned in the infographic. And probably one of the most important aspects of the webinars is that we also have a Q&A session where those members of the IUA DigEd community can come and ask their questions and receive a student perspective on whatever their query or concerns are about their own approach to online learning. So both of our webinars so far we feel were great successes, and we received both feedback. And as I mentioned, the Q&A in particular always gets well received. So personally, from my perspective, it was quite amazing for me after our first webinar to think that despite the fact that we're over a month into online learning, for a lot of lecturers, this was the first opportunity that they had to kind of gauge a student response and to get feedback on their approach to online learning. So I was quite taken aback to think that, but that's the kind of feedback we got. So in that regard, it came across as quite useful, I thought. So just in terms of the webinars themselves, they take quite a conversational tone because, as I mentioned, student interns have such different experiences, and we can dip in and out of each team and provide our experience. So it's very conversational. So for example, one of our student interns, Laura Muldowney, she's currently a work placement in medicine. So she would have a completely different perspective on her experience of online learning and labs compared to someone like me, who's doing more math orientated subjects, which involves just having your head in the books for quite prolonged periods, I suppose. Another key aspect of webinars then is the Q&A. So we take a three-pronged approach to the Q&A. You can ask questions at the end, and we have a dedicated section throughout using the chat box. Or a new thing we've done now is that you can ask questions in advance using a form we've set up. So we encourage people to ask any questions they might have, and we provide as much detailed feedback as we can to academics. And so far, we've had great feedback to this particular response. And especially, we encourage people to take the microphone during the webinar, and we can have a conversation with them. So the conversation approach to these webinars has worked very well for us so far. And we actually have another webinar coming up next month, which will be focused on students' online collaboration. Hopefully that will be as good and beneficial as well.
Thanks, Ruairi. So just to mention this particular webinar that I'm recommending to you, we had about probably about 30 to 35 people attended it at the time, but the recording of the webinar has been viewed more than 350 times. And we got such a great response to it, and people came back and said, is there any chance you could provide a tip sheet on it? So, so that's exactly what the students did, and they came up with this tip sheet, which you can download from the webinar page as well. And it's just a really quick kind of, I suppose, guide to staff on what makes a difference for students in online teaching. Just to mention a couple of other things then that the students are involved in. We have a fantastic Instagram team, so they're at edtl.iua on Instagram, and if anybody follows them on Instagram, I just find they're absolutely fantastic. And I know that we have some of the Instagram team on here, but Ruairi, do you want to maybe mention just very briefly the Instagram campaign and perhaps some of the YouTube work that's been happening recently?
So our Instagram page has received great feedback. So it's aimed at students primarily, but there's loads of academics and lecturers following us as well, because we post such a wide variety of content posted. So the Instagram page itself is run by a subgroup of the student interns, but it features contributions from all of us. So as you can even see from the screenshot, there's such a wide variety of content. So for example, there's bite-sized summaries of some of the content we post on the EDTL website. There's live Instagram stories, question and answer sessions where students can ask questions and get any tips and feedback from us. And there's also campaigns we run on the page. So for example, earlier on in the year, we ran a Defeat the Cheat campaign, which was aimed at raising awareness around contract cheating. So I think if anyone who does follow the account, Sharon said, would probably quickly realize that there's very rarely something not happening, whether it's on Instagram stories or new resources being posted up on the page itself. So it's definitely worth to follow. YouTube is another external kind of social media page we've also started trying to develop. So far on YouTube, we've been using it for longer form content. So I suppose as of now, we have a good collection of Microsoft Office related content, which we feel covers the most pressing questions that students have about using Microsoft Office in an academic context. So this would probably involve basic data manipulation using Microsoft Excel, or how to effectively cite your references using Microsoft Word. So as well as using the EDTL blog, we're also utilizing services such as Instagram and YouTube just to kind of maximize our reach and go where the students and the academics who need our advice are.
Thanks, Ruairi. So just to finish up, Niall, you'll be delighted to hear that we're just at an end now. We know now that semester 2 is continuing as semester 1, and there was an article in the Independent yesterday indicating that students are not going to be back on campus before September, and we're not even sure what's going to happen in September. However, the steering committee did, as I say, back in September, decide that we needed to focus back on the original project goals again. So rather than responding to the current situation, to go back to the original aims and to look at the bigger picture. So that is informing our work currently. But one of the questions that we are very keen on starting a conversation or supporting a conversation around is, what is teaching and learning going to look like in higher education post-COVID? There is a certain amount of nostalgia, and I'm sure you're seeing this yourselves, and possibly you even feel this yourselves, that we want to get back to normal. But we know, and even looking back at the results of the index survey from November 2019, that what was happening pre-COVID wasn't ideal either. So I suppose the question is, both what can we learn from the current situation and bring with us that will be useful in the future, but also do we have an opportunity now to reimagine what teaching and learning might look like in a post-COVID environment? So those are some of the sort of bigger questions that we are considering just at the moment. I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, and so I'd love for you to contribute to the 3 Padlets that have been set up. And I'm sure Anya will pop those into the chat box again. But also that notion of well, what is it going to look like when we do get back on campus, when we can gather together again? What will have changed, and what will have changed for the better? So I'm going to finish up there. I think I just have a big thank you for listening. I'm going to go back and have a look at the chat, and if you have any questions at this stage, we'd be absolutely delighted to hear them. And I will stop sharing now if I can figure out where the button is. There we go.
Great, thanks so much, Sharon and Ruairi. This is fantastically informative. I've learned an awful lot. And we've just about 5 minutes. If I know Niall O'Brien is being monitoring the chat, the Padlets, and there's some comments coming through on the chat as well. Is there any particular question anybody wants to put to Sharon or Ruairi at this point? We've just 2 or 3 minutes.
Niall, can I be bold and ask a question? Sorry, just since Sharon is there. Sharon, that was just excellent. And Ruairi, thank you so much. Really, really excellent. I was trying to listen and tweet at the same time and not get totally jumbled up. I just on what you said, Sharon, and maybe you haven't more at this point, but do you have any even initial thoughts? Because it's something that's really occupying my mind as well. What could the future look like, or even the immediate one, which looking forward into hopefully 21, 22 might be some hybrid model of online and, face-to-face or physical teaching? Are there any kind of key things we can take with us, do you think?
I think that, we hear a lot, I suppose, in the media and from students and student unions as well, about what's not working for them at the moment. And, to be fair, they're missing out so much on that kind of campus environment. But I do worry that we are hearing the voices that are shouting the loudest. And I think that there are a lot of students for whom this situation actually works quite well. And I would love to try and amplify their voices over the next few months. I would love to see a lot more flexibility in what we do. And I think to myself, going back 5 years where I was so involved in, policies for ensuring attendance at lectures. And now we know that actually attendance at lectures probably isn't as important as we thought it was. So I would love a lot more flexibility in terms of how students can choose to learn. And I know that it's a trade-off. You know, a lot of staff, all they want to do is to get back into the classroom. But can we think about you know, how we could do things a little bit differently? We know that there are students who have, you know, caring responsibilities, who have maybe mobility issues, or even just, you know, the rents that students are being asked to pay. Can we get around that in some way? So that's one of the things that really occupies my mind. And the other thing, Anya, you'll probably be familiar with my thoughts on this already, but we've known for a long time that that assessment and sitting down for formal exams in big exam halls is not a good form of assessment. We know that. This has really, we haven't been able to do that over the last year, and you know, the world hasn't fallen apart. There's a lot of talk around academic integrity, and you'll hear Ruairi speaking about it. But I think it would be a real failure on our part if we went back to that mass exam hall situation again. So those are my two main things. I don't know, Ruairi, if you'd like to come in on anything.
Yes, I agree with you. I think especially with regards to assessment, I suppose it's probably where the majority of anxieties lie. But even then, there's an opportunity, I think, going forward that we should probably redesign assessment. Maybe instead of these, for a lot of subjects, the end of year sit-down exam isn't a particularly appropriate form of assessment, and there's much better ways to kind of get a student's feedback and kind of assess their knowledge of the course. So I think, again, going forward, we could take this as an opportunity and learn from it. The old way, as Sharon said, had a lot of problems with it, and it would be a shame going forward if we just discard everything we learned just in a rush to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
I might come in here. I have a lot of questions to ask, but I'm going to park them until later, until our discussion period. But the chat is beginning to really come alive, and just a very interesting strand at the moment. Elaine Chapman asks everybody, is the future blended learning? And she says she knows a lot of disabled students are afraid of things returning to normal on return, and a lot of people identify with that, and doing things online creates better organizational possibilities. There's so many comments coming in, I'll leave them for the moment, but please keep an eye on chat, everybody. And I know Sharon and Ruairi are also keeping an eye on the chat all morning. And I forgot to say earlier, Sharon, and I think Ruairi as well, are graciously going to help us with the general discussion period at 12 o'clock. In fact, Sharon is going to lead that, but she'll be influenced by what she's read in the Padlets and the chat all morning. So we're looking forward to a general conversation later on. But with my timekeeping hat on, I'm just going to thank Sharon and Ruairi again. It was very stimulating. It's already, I can see its influence on the chat. Everybody is reflecting, and there's so much to talk about. Also, I always forget something, but Anya, who's so organised, has twice reminded you, I think, of the hashtag is CONUL TL21. So just remember to keep tweeting. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Julie de Faubert from TU Dublin, who's going to bring us through some snapshot sessions.
Great, thanks, Niall, and thank you, Sharon.